So in times like now, as I said this morning, when I feel that I'm living in a nut house, it's very helpful to really use that to focus on what the Buddha has been trying to get through our thick skulls, which is that there's no happiness anywhere in samsara. There's no perfection. There's no peace as long as our minds are under the control of afflictions and polluted karma. And so instead of getting upset about how things are in the world, to realize this is just the nature of samsara. Just as fire's nature is to burn, samsara's nature is to be unsatisfactory. And to see that that is coming from our minds due to our ignorance, and that there is another option, because ignorance is a wrong view, it misapprehends things. Therefore, it's possible to eliminate it through understanding and gaining the wisdom of things as they really are. So the true path exists, and the true cessation, nirvana, the cessation of all this mess and its causes, that also exists. And so knowing that, and knowing that there is an actual state of peace that doesn't involve suppressing things or doing strange things with our mind, but there's an actual state of peace that we can arrive at through realizing reality as it is. Then let's turn our aims towards that instead of towards tweaking our samsara, and taking that even a step beyond. Let's turn our attention to full awakening, so that instead of abandoning everybody else in this mess of samsara, we can help them to free their own minds from afflictions and karma. And so what His Holiness is going to teach us this evening in approaching the Buddhist path will show us exactly how to tame our own mind and how to benefit others. So let's do it with that kind of motivation. So the part that I hope we'll cover this evening is one of my favorite parts of the book. And it was mentioned, part of what we'll cover this evening was also mentioned in Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, in the proof of how, because of dependent arising, you can prove that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha exist. So you might want to check back in that book too and reread that section. His Nagarjuna explains it in the Karikas, and then Tsongkhapa elaborates on it in Ocean of Reasoning. Okay, so tonight we're starting on page 33, the section on dependent arising and the three jewels. Okay, so remember I was saying, I don't know if it was last week or earlier this week, that if His Holiness once said that if the Buddha ever had a brand or a slogan, it would be dependent arising. So this shows us why he said that. Okay, so indicating the importance of realizing dependent arising, the Buddha said in the Rice Seedling Sutra, monastics, whoever sees dependent arising sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Tathagata. In other words, the Buddha. So this doesn't mean seeing with your eyes. Okay. Actually, there's a similar kind of citation in one of the Pali scriptures. There was an old monk who, said, I really wanted to see the Buddha before I died. And the Buddha scolded him. He said, why do you want to look at this old body? You should, seeing the Buddha isn't seeing the person and the body. It's seeing the mental state actualized in yourself. So how does seeing dependent arising lead to seeing the Dharma, which leads to seeing the Buddha? A process of progressive understanding is needed. When we realize causal dependence, that everything we perceive and experience arises as a result of its own causes and conditions, our perspective on the world and on our inner experiences shifts. Yeah, can you feel that a little bit just hearing that sentence? Or, what happens if we were to really spend a good chunk of time contemplating that? That everything we perceive and experience arises as a result of its own causes and conditions. Yeah, that everything we're seeing and experience does not exist under its own power, but under the power of things that are not it. And that includes us. Yeah, that we only exist because the causes for us exist. Yeah, and those causes are changing, so we're changing. And everything in our world is changing. And how do you feel about living in a place where nothing is stable? Where you're living in the midst of insecurity. Yeah, because we cannot control things. Yeah, things are under the control of causes and conditions. And our wish at the present moment is not necessarily one of those causes and conditions. And especially when those causes and conditions are, overshadowed by afflictions that create polluted karma. And that's how everything rolls on. Yeah. So that makes us feel a little bit different. Yeah, because usually, I don't know about you, but usually, wake up in the morning, there's me and everything around me, and I can see it, and it exists objectively, and I have control or should have control over it. And certain things are going to give me happiness, and certain things are going to give me pain. And so my job today is to draw all the things that are going to give me happiness close to me and get away or destroy all the things that are going to bug me. And that's my purpose for life. Ugh. But that's kind of how it is, isn't it? You know, we have this incredible Buddha potential, but then our whole purpose is, you know, running after external objects that we think will please us and getting far away from the ones we think will harm us. And so often the ones we think that will please us, you know, wind up creating messes for us instead. Okay? So when we really meditate on causal dependence, just our feeling towards things, it shifts. So due to understanding that these exist only because their causes and conditions exist, our world, our experience, and even ourselves no longer seem so fixed and solid. Being dependent, they have no essence of their own. Yeah, so when things are underlain, when they're pushed by previous causes, in constant transformation, how could they have any kind of essence that went from one moment to the next without changing? Yeah, how could they have any independent essence? Yeah, they can't, because if there's an independent essence, then they couldn't change. Yeah, but they do change. As our understanding of mutual dependence and mere designation by name and concept deepens, we will appreciate that a disparity exists between the way things appear and the way they exist. So the more we contemplate mutual dependence, how things are established in relationship to other things, and how things exist dependent on the mind that conceives and labels them and designates them, the more we contemplate that kind of dependence, then the more we look around, we realize, gee, things don't really exist the way they appear to me. They appear so fixed and solid, but actually, and they appear so independent and objective, but actually they don't exist that way at all. There's some dissonance between how they appear to my senses and how they could possibly exist. Okay? Yeah, it's like, yeah, if you were to look at figures on the TV and think, and think they're real people, but then when you went to touch them or shake their hands or ask them questions, they completely ignored you, then you would get some sense of, how they appear and how they exist don't match. Yeah, so it's quite a gross example. But, if we really think how things appear to us and how they would have to exist if they existed in the way they appeared, then we realize there's some dissonance. Yeah, something isn't holding together. While things appear to be autonomous, objective, independent realities out there, they do not, in fact, exist in this way. If we focus repeatedly on branches, trunk, twigs, and leaves arranged in a certain manner and question what makes this collection of things a tree, we will begin to understand that neither the individual parts nor the collection of those parts is a tree, and that the tree exists by being merely designated independence on its parts. Okay? So, we're fortunate. We have many trees around. So look out at a tree and, pick any one you want and focus not on tree, but focus on trunk, okay, on branches, on leaves, and then see that they're arranged in a certain manner, because they could all be just lying in a pile on the ground. But these are arranged in a certain manner. And ask yourself, what makes that a tree? There's trunk and branches and twigs and leaves. They're arranged in that pattern. But where's the tree? And what makes that collection of things a tree? Okay, so are you kind of getting it? Does it seem kind of strange? Like, well, I know there's a tree there somewhere, but actually when I look at it, I don't see the tree. I see trunk and branches and twigs and leaves. I don't see a tree. Yeah. But then part of your mind says, but that is a tree. It is a tree. But then if it is a tree, what makes it a tree? Because neither the parts aren't a tree. And just putting those parts, none of which are a tree, together in a certain arrangement, how is that going to make a tree if all the things that you're putting in that arrangement are not trees? How does mixing them up in another formation make them a tree? If you have 5 oranges in a bag, how does taking them out of the bag and lining them up in a row make them an apple? You have 5 things that aren't an apple. You can change their formation any way you want, but you're not going to get an apple out of it, are you? So the same thing. Okay. So what makes this collection of things a tree? Then the only thing is, you watch how your mind looks at that and sometimes sees leaves and twigs and branches and trunk, and sometimes sees a collection, and sometimes sees a tree. And then you realize the thing that makes it go back and forth between all those is your own mind. Whether you're conceiving it as a tree, or conceiving it as a collection, or conceiving it as individual parts. That our mind is what influences how it appears to us. Okay? So we begin to see that neither the individual parts nor the collection of those parts is a tree, and that the tree exists by being merely designated independence on its parts. So by our mind putting those parts together and giving it a name. Okay. Have you seen the Escher paintings? I used to have a a book of those that I looked at in my younger days. But it's quite interesting when you look at them, how it can look like one thing and then you just change your perspective and the same drawing you see other things in. Yeah. I used to stare at those drawings for hours and, watch how it changed from this to that without the page changing, only with my conceptual ability, how I put different lines and spaces together. That's what made it look like one thing or made it look like another thing, not from the side of the drawing. So that gives us some flavor about the power of the mind to conceive and designate. And in that way, things are established in relation to the mind. Because it is dependent on all these factors, the tree is empty of objective, independent, or inherent existence. It does not exist in isolation. Yeah, we usually look out, there's a tree. Looks like one tree in isolation from everything else, doesn't it? Can you look out and pick out one tree? Yeah, it looks like, oh, that's a separate thing. But other times you look out and you see a whole landscape and you don't see individual trees. And if somebody, like if you were just looking out the window and somebody said, how many trees are there? Yeah, you wouldn't know because you're seeing the whole landscape. You would have to stop and pick out each individual tree to be able to count them. Yeah. Okay, so the tree doesn't exist in isolation from its own side or under its own power. Yeah, because it exists on causes, conditions, parts, and the conceiving and designating mind. Okay. While an inherently existent tree cannot be found under analysis, a tree still exists. How does it exist? It exists dependently. Thus we see that emptiness and dependent arising are not contradictory. It's probably better to say that being empty and dependent arising are not contradictory, and that in fact they're mutually complementary. Everything is empty of inherent existence, and simultaneously everything exists, but not in the independent fashion that it appears to. It exists in dependence on other factors. Yeah. So how would it seem to you? This would be an interesting experiment to try tomorrow, is when we see everybody, or even try tonight for that matter, think of every person you see as just the result of causes and conditions. So when I look at somebody, I see two parents and a bunch of food. Okay? Now, how often, when you look at people, do you think that they're a product of parents and a product of food? Yeah. They seem like independent entities, Kind of intellectually we know, well, everybody has parents. But when we look at people, do you look at them and imagine them as having parents? When I look at you and I try and think, oh, what do your parents look like? Yeah, well, I just saw your parents yesterday. That's a little bit easier. But still, that's not what they looked like when you were born. Yeah. And it isn't like, you took half of mom and half of dad and glued them together. Yeah. So there's causes and conditions, and then a whole pile of food. Now, if you were to look at people like that, would that change how you relate to them? Yeah. They're a product of mom and dad and food. Uh-huh.
I think to go even broader than that, to see that they're a product of medicine and shelter and teachers and various experiences and various problems, that a whole lot of understanding would come when someone is appearing to you in a certain way, to see that this is the result of causes and conditions, that they might not necessarily, they're not choosing to act this way or to be this way.
Yeah, that they're conditioned phenomena and they've had a lot of causes and conditions and a lot of experiences that we don't know. And we don't know how they've interpreted those causes, those experiences either. Yeah. And yet when we look at somebody, we think, oh, there's this individual who's like X, Y, and Z. And actually, they're very complicated things. Yeah.
We impute our own reasoning onto why they're appearing in a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
So what you're suggesting, it sounds very freeing to see everyone in that way, but it makes me wonder whether it's going to be harder to generate compassion because you just see people as more like objects.
No, I think it would make you see things less like objects and more as living beings with feelings, because everything about them is conditioned, and especially, past experiences and so on. And so I think you'd become much more sensitive to the diversity in people and how people would have all sorts of different ways of thinking that we've never even thought of, because we usually see them as one fixed objective entity.
I guess you couldn't just stop at sperm and egg and food.
Pardon?
If you see people as sperm and egg and food, to me that's kind of like an object.
Yeah, you're not looking at them and seeing a little sperm and a little egg and a pile of food. Right. Yeah, but you're seeing that what forms their body is only one part of them, remember. It's not the whole person. But you begin to become aware of how much we judge people based on their body, how much we think we know about people based on their body, but actually, what are you eating? But actually, what you're seeing is, a sperm and an egg and a lot of food in a certain combination. Yeah? Maybe try it, okay, and see if it makes you become more sensitive to what may be going on, and to see that all the things you impute on somebody based on the shape or color or arrangement of atoms in their body is actually an imputation on something that is a product of sperm and egg and food. And so all this stuff that we put on, this person is such and such a race, therefore blah, blah. There's such and such a sex, therefore blah, blah. There's such and such an age, therefore blah, blah. And you begin to see how all of that is not there on that person. Yeah? That's coming from our assumptions. So it can really help us, help to free us from a lot of judgments and very narrow ways of looking at people. Yeah. So try it and see if it helps you. Yeah. I never watched Star Trek except for one thing, one episode, which I remember because somebody on the spaceship fell in love with somebody from, I don't know, it was another universe or something. And they were opposite sexes and they were very attracted to each other and they fell in love with each other. But then one of them got transformed. I don't know if it was back into what the form they originally were in. Oh, are you a Star Trek expert? Okay, please tell the story. Okay.
So this was the doctor from the Enterprise, and she fell in love with this diplomat who belonged to a different species, and it was actually two in one. There was a symbiont inside of him, and then there was the host, which was the outside figure, and the host came from a type of people who were raised to host this symbiont, who was actually the sort of like the controller of that. So it was of that body. I mean, but it looked like a person. Mm-hmm. And so what happened was that the host died. And so the symbiont, who actually was the one who had all the characteristics and personality that the doctor had fallen in love with, right? A symbiont who lived for thousands of years. And so when that host died, that symbiont needed to be transferred to another host. But because they were in a faraway galaxy, they only had one host available that was able to get this symbiont, and it happened to be a female host. So then the symbiont was implanted in a female host, and then the doctor could no longer relate in the same manner because it happened to be now a same-sex person rather than the opposite sex host. And so she had to undo the relationship, even though inside it was the same personality, the same characteristics. It's just the outside that had changed.
The outside was different, yeah. The value of having a Star Trek specialist in the audience. But it's a very good example of how much imputation goes in dependence upon the body. And what would happen if it wasn't even transferred into another female, but it was transferred into a box, And all of a sudden, the person you loved had the body of a cardboard box. Yeah. Then what? Then you have to ask, how much of this is the creation of my mind? And how much is there really an objective person there that I'm in love with? So we can go around imagining each other as cardboard boxes, and then see if you really dislike the other person so much, or if you really think they're so fantastic.
During this last election, I think they even used this word, but that we actually do that already. We make projections of people, and they are like cardboard figures.
Oh, yeah.
That seemed to have happened.
Yeah.
In that last election, we had our conceptual images of people, and they were like cut out of cardboard, and they couldn't change. Couldn't couldn't see a real person there.
Yeah. Everything is empty of inherent existence, and simultaneously everything exists, but not in the independent fashion that it appears to. It exists independence on other factors. Underlying strong emotions such as clinging attachment, anger, and jealousy is an assumption that we are inherently existent, independent persons that exist in and of ourselves. So there's a real me and there's a real you, and I'm in competition with you. Yeah, because I've got to be better. There's a real me that has to be better than a real you. Yeah. Similarly, there appears to be an independent reality of objectively existent people and things in the world. By recognizing the disparity between appearance and reality, we come to understand that our perceptions and ideas of things are exaggerated. You know, one of the most obvious ways they're exaggerated is we expect that we're all going to be here tomorrow. And we would be shocked if we weren't here tomorrow, if somebody died in the meantime. Yeah. But the reality is, because we're dependent, yeah, our lifetime, our lifespan is very uncertain. Yeah, but we don't think that way. I had told you this morning that Venerable Sankhya Kadro was thinking of staying there in Prajna Cottage. So this afternoon I tapped on her door because I wanted to go get the vacuum cleaner. And nobody answered, and I opened the door, and everything was gone. Well, the furniture was there, but all her stuff was gone. And it was like, oh, when did that happen? I didn't know it was happening. I didn't even hear it was happening. They moved all that stuff, and I didn't hear anything, you know? And I was like, this feeling of, oh, and yet, why not? You know, why couldn't somebody just move out like that and everything be changed? Did all of you know? Okay, some of you knew. Yeah, so so that kind of change can happen like that, but often we don't even think of it. Investigating how our mind perceives and interprets the things we encounter, we develop insight into the functions of the mind and the different types and levels of consciousness operating within us. Okay? So really examining our perceptions and interpretations gives us a lot of insight into how our mind functions, you know? So if that's why, if you really go into it, that meditation on where was the thought before you thought it, and where is it while you're thinking about it, and where does it go to after it stops, you know, that can lead you into all sorts of interesting things about the mind and about how things arise and exist. We also come to appreciate that although some of our emotional states seem so strong and their objects appear so vividly, they are in fact similar to illusions in that they do not exist in the way they appear to us. So this really relates to what you were saying, how in the election we often made cardboard figures. And that's why I often, when I talk about Donnie, I freely admit that I've made a, you know, it has nothing to do with him. It's a cartoon figure, yeah, that I like to make fun of. Yeah, which actually has elements of myself in it, although not the hair.
Thank goodness.
although things change, maybe I'll come in tomorrow with
You better get busy now. The wheel will pick up and he'll come out.
yeah.
Did you see that he asked for an FBI?
Did I what?
Did you see that he asked for an FBI investigation?
Yes. Well, that's he had to, because they don't have the votes to confirm Kavanaugh. So they had to ask for it because they have no other choice. Yeah. Actually, if we can detour for a minute. When I was thinking about it more last night, what really came to mind was, he said, she said, we're never going to find the end of that. I happen to believe her, but there's no way I can objectively prove it. But beyond that, the person that I saw, the Kavanaugh that I saw give that at the hearing, when I looked at the characteristics of that person, he didn't seem to have the characteristics that I thought a Supreme Court judge should have. Because I thought, gee, judges are supposed to be nonpartisan. He was very clearly Republican. He had conspiracy theories. He couldn't listen to other people's things. He was not cooperative and angry. And I thought, wow, could a person like this actually be a good judge? Because it seems to me to be a good judge, you would have to be able to put a lot of your personal stuff behind you and just look at the situation according to the law. But the person I saw in that hearing was completely involved in his own thing. But last night, nobody talked about that. And I was going, gee, am I the only person who thinks that this is a bit weird? Maybe he's not qualified because of his character. And then, thank goodness, today people started talking about that. Yeah. Yeah. But so this, to relate that back here, how you get one image of a person. And it was very interesting. The New York Times did a little piece with his testimony on September 4th, and then his to the Senate, and then his testimony yesterday to the Senate, and what he said there, and then what he said yesterday. And it was like he completely contradicted what he said. He said, judges should be nonpartisan, and then, but the Democrats did blah, 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 blah. It was so stark to see that. And what it helps you realize is that human beings are very complicated. Yeah, and we're made up of all sorts of contradictory parts. And to think that we ever really know somebody, because, when he testified on the 4th, I don't think he thought I'm lying. It was that part of himself that thought that way was speaking. But when he testified yesterday, another part of him that thought in a completely opposite way was saying totally opposite things, and they all bear the same label, the same term. Yeah. So, expecting people to be consistent is, one of our really false assumptions, isn't it? Yeah. And of course, some people are more consistent than others. And, when we're looking for Supreme Court judges, we want to choose people who are more consistent, But, it just really shows us how we can form one idea of a person and then put that person. He was sitting, I think, probably in the same chair. Yeah, 23 days later. But the mind was totally different. Yeah. And to realize, all of that, that's just the way people are. And we are like that too.
I think it really shows the value of practicing fortitude and non-retaliation, because I think the fact that he felt threatened was a big catalyst for his coming out full on.
Yeah.
Apparently. So if he had any kind of a practice, spiritual practice, to just be calm and accepting and sort of come out with some kind of a rational way, that he might have given himself a more of a service than what he did this time around.
Yeah. So very good example of the benefits of fortitude. Yeah, and the benefits of having a spiritual path and practicing it. Yeah, so that's a good example. If you're ever, next time you're out at UU or something and somebody says, well, isn't anger good? Then that's a very good example to use. How he showed himself there. That could wind up costing him the whole thing. Yeah. So we're the same way. Yeah, when we're angry and we lose it, boy. Yeah. All the trust and everything we build up with people, just boing. There was another article that I read that noted some of this behavior. But it was also an article, they had different law professors and stuff saying that, these are the kind of qualities that are needed, and people are now beginning to question if he has those qualities. But it was presented in a very sympathetic way, like, yeah, well, the poor guy said his whole life has been ruined, his reputation, his family has been ruined, everything's been trashed, he may not ever be able to teach again. And it became what they call a himpathy article, That's a cognate of empathy is empathy, And this poor man who's a victim, and no wonder he's angry, and no wonder he's distraught, this poor guy whose whole life has been destroyed. Not mentioning Dr. Blazey's life. Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. But, they're actually, both of them are suffering a lot in different ways for different reasons. And this is the nature of samsara. Yeah. And really, you can see that if you have a spiritual practice, there's a way to transform the mind and heal from these things. But if you don't have a spiritual practice, then this kind of stuff just drowns you. Dependent arising is the foundation for all Dharma practices. Woo! Okay. The two levels of dependent arising, causal dependence and dependent designation, are the main factors through which spiritual practitioners accomplish their aspirations. By developing a deep understanding of the nature of reality in terms of causal dependence, we come to appreciate the workings of karma and its results. Our actions bring results. This is what I was talking about last night. Pain and suffering arise due to destructive actions, and happiness and desirable experiences are the results of constructive actions. Understanding this, we choose to live with good ethical conduct, which enables us to have a higher rebirth in the future. Yeah, so that's what in Precious Garland, remember Nagarjuna stressed that at the beginning. Okay, because it's going to take us a while to realize emptiness, and until then we need a series of good rebirths. And so even though having faith in the law of cause and effect, or having confidence in it, entails scriptural authority, and not just like a direct inference by power of the fact. So even though that's harder to gain, it's more necessary at the beginning of the practice, so that we make sure we create the causes for a series of good rebirths. Because without that, we're sunk. Through deep contemplation of dependent designation, we come to realize emptiness, the ultimate mode of existence. This wisdom tackles the fundamental ignorance keeping us bound in cyclic existence, allowing us to fulfill our spiritual goals of liberation and full awakening. Okay, again, chapter 1 of Precious Garland. Dependent arising also underlies the Four Truths. Through such reflection and analysis, we understand that the self-grasping ignorance that misapprehends reality gives rise to our mental afflictions, which are the true origins, and that these in turn bring about the suffering we experience, true dukkha. Okay? So it's showing how the first two truths, true dukkha and true origins, are themselves dependently arising events, that depend on other factors, here in particular, ignorance. Okay? So this is important to see too. When we're meditating on the Four Truths, it isn't just a thing of understanding what they are, like that, but understanding that they themselves are dependent arising, and thus they themselves are empty of inherent existence. Okay, His Holiness goes into a beautiful thing about this in Volume 3. Dangling the carrot. Okay. Understanding dependent arising also enables us to realize the lack of independent existence of persons and phenomena, their emptiness. So when we understand emptiness, then the fact that somebody could say one thing and 3 weeks later say another thing, and in both situations from their side think they're speaking the truth and speaking sincerely, when we understand emptiness and dependent arising, then we realize why that happens. Because there's no fixed essence that is that person. There's just a bunch of ever-changing mental factors and karmic propensities and habits and so on, that are ripening in each moment, making a person act and appear in certain ways, So they aren't some fixed thing that we expect them to be some fixed thing, but they aren't. Yeah. Understanding dependent arising also enables us to realize the lack of independent existence of persons and phenomena, their emptiness. This wisdom realizing emptiness, that's the true path, the fourth truth, has the power to overcome all ignorance, wrong views, and afflictions, the second truth, because they lack a valid basis. While emptiness and dependent arising can be proven by reasoning as well as directly experienced. Through this, we will appreciate that a state exists in which all ignorance and afflictions have been removed. This is nirvana, true cessations, the third truth. Thus, the Dharma jewel, true cessations and true paths exist. Does that make you go, wow? I remember the first years, when I was a Buddhist, I kept saying, how do I know the Buddha exists? How do I know the Buddha exists? And that question was always there. How do I know the Buddha exists? That it wasn't just something, made up, like God. Because I didn't have any faith in God. So how did I know the Buddha existed? So when I found, maybe 30, 40 years later, this argument, it was like, because we haven't finished it. It's going to go on to say how the Buddha exists too. I went, that's what I was looking for at the beginning, so that you can really have confidence in the existence of the three jewels. And then that way that it's possible to actualize the path, and so then you want to practice it. Okay, so I jumped ahead. So we've established the Dharma jewel, true cessations and true paths. If such a state as nirvana exists, individuals must be able to actualize it. Okay? This leads us to understand the existence of the Arya Sangha, those beings who perceive emptiness directly. Okay? It also demonstrates the existence of Buddhas, omniscient beings who have perfected this state of cessation. So if the Dharma of true paths and true cessations exists, then there's people who have realized that partially, the Arya Sangha, and fully, the Buddhas. In this way, the understanding of dependent arising leads us to establish the existence of the three jewels of refuge, the Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha. For this reason, the Buddha said that those who see dependent arising see the Dharma, and those who see the Dharma see the Tathagata. Okay? Is this all coming together and gelling? I believe this statement of the Buddha could also mean that by seeing dependent arising on the level of conventional appearance, we see causal relationships and understand karma, compassion, bodhicitta, and the method aspect of the path. Through accomplishing the method aspect of the path, which depends on causes and conditions, we come to see, that is, to actualize the form body, or rupakaya, of a Buddha. By understanding dependent arising in relationship to the ultimate mode of existence, we experience the meaning of emptiness, the suchness of all phenomena, and by that we see or actualize the truth body, the dharmakaya, of a Buddha. A Buddha's mind, specifically an awakened one's wisdom of ultimate reality. In this way, both the body and the mind of the Buddha are actualized. Wow. Okay. A few words, but there's a whole lot of meaning in them. Okay. So it's very good to, spend some time, go over this. How dependent arising proves the existence of the three jewels and how it explains that quotation from the Rice Seedling Sutra, that if you see dependent arising, you see the Dharma, and if you see the Dharma, you see the Tathagata. And then second, how understanding dependent arising, on the conventional level, helps you understand the method aspect of the path, and thus leads you to create the causes for the form bodies of the Buddha, and how understanding dependent designation helps us to attain the mind of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya. So the reflection: all persons and phenomena exist in dependence on other factors. There are three types of dependence: causal dependence for impermanent things only, mutual dependence for permanent and impermanent phenomena, and mere designation by terms and concept that applies to impermanent and permanent phenomena as well. Dependent arising contradicts the possibility of independent or inherent existence. Understanding this can eradicate grasping inherent existence, the root of our dukkha in cyclic existence. Okay. Then the third point to contemplate: the wisdom that eradicates ignorance, true paths, and the freedom from dukkha that come about due to it, true cessations, are the Dharma jewel. And then 4, people who have actualized the Dharma jewel in their minds are the Sangha jewel and the Buddha jewel. Thus, the three jewels of refuge exist. If the possibility to end suffering exists, we're on the next section, the possibility of ending dukkha. If the possibility to end suffering exists, then pursuing that aim is worthwhile. But if dukkha is a given, trying to eliminate it is a waste of effort. From the Buddhist viewpoint, 2 factors make liberation possible: the clear light nature of the mind, and then second, the adventitious nature of the defilements. So the clear light nature of the mind refers to the basic capacity of the mind to cognize objects, its clear and cognizant nature. So let's look at the footnote and see if it describes what I want to say right now. Okay. The term clear light has different meanings depending on the context. It may also refer to the emptiness of inherent existence or to the subtlest mind. That's exactly what I wanted to say. Glad that's in the footnote. Okay. So this is another example, that we find there's a term and we encounter a term in one situation, and then we think every time we meet that term, it has the same meaning. Yeah, wrong. And it's easier for us to see that in our own native language. Yeah, we know that one word can have many different meanings depending on the context. But when we're learning another language, and especially the Dharma, we're trying to understand new words and new concepts. We want, okay, here's that word. There's one and only one definition of it, and one and only one context in how it can be used. And then we get ourselves really tangled up. Okay, so clear light nature of mind is one of those terms. Okay, at least it was for me. Yeah. The mind's failure to know objects must then be due to obstructing factors. In some cases, obstructing factors may be physical. If we put our hand over our eyes, we cannot see. But in a deeper sense, our seeing is hindered by two types of obstructions: afflictive obscurations that prevent liberation from cyclic existence, and cognitive obscurations that prevent omniscience. Each Buddhist tenet system has a different way of identifying what constitutes these true obstructions. And actually, some tenet systems don't even talk much about cognitive obstructions. The description here is based on the writings of Nagarjuna, the great 2nd century Indian sage. In 70 stanzas on emptiness, he notes that the conception that things arise from causes and conditions, things that arise from causes and conditions exist in their own right is ignorance. Okay? So if we think that things that arise due to causes and conditions have their own findable essence from their own side, then that's an example of ignorance. That's the meaning of the fundamental ignorance that causes samsara. The clear light nature of mind has the ability to cognize all objects, but ignorance and its latencies obstruct this. All faulty states of mind are based on and depend on ignorance, and the 12 links of dependent origination, the process through which cyclic existence arises lifetime after lifetime, followed. So it realizes how ignorance and the 12 links of dependent arising follow from ignorance. Okay, so Aryadeva, Nagarjuna's chief student or disciple, states in, what do you think the book is? The 400, okay. The consciousness that is the seed of existence has objects as its sphere of activity. Okay. When selflessness is seen in objects, the seed of existence is destroyed. Okay, so the consciousness that is the seed of existence has objects as its sphere of activity. When selflessness is seen in objects, the seed of existence is destroyed. What do you think that seed of existence is? Yeah, self-grasping ignorance. Okay. So here, the seed of existence is referring to existence and cyclic existence, and in particular to the link of renewed existence, the 10th link. What is the consciousness that is the seed of cyclic existence? If consciousness in general were the root of cyclic existence, there would be no way to overcome cyclic existence, because consciousness has a clear and cognizant nature, and nothing can counteract its nature or sever its continuity. Okay. Here, Aryadeva is referring not to consciousness in general, but to a specific type of consciousness, ignorance. His point is that cyclic existence does not arise without a cause. It does not arise from a discordant cause, and it doesn't arise from a permanent creator. So if you remember in the 400, Aryadeva spent a lot of chapters refuting these three things. Okay, dukkha, or anything for that, functioning thing for that matter, arising haphazardly without a cause or randomly from a discordant cause, a cause that doesn't have the capacity to bring that kind of effect, or from a permanent creator. Because a permanent creator cannot change, and creation involves change. Cyclic existence arises from an undisciplined, ignorant mind. By saying that consciousness has objects as its sphere of activity, Aryadeva indicates the mind's potential to realize objects. Then he stresses that by realizing selflessness, self-grasping ignorance can be eliminated. Since ignorance grasps inherent existence, or self, it can be overcome by the wisdom realizing the opposite, the selflessness or emptiness of inherent existence. By removing the ignorance that obscures our knowledge of phenomena, the ability to perceive all objects is possible. Okay? So really, gaining some feel, that when he says that his point is that cyclic existence does not arise without a cause, from a discordant cause, or from a permanent creator. It arises from an undisciplined, ignorant mind. Okay? So that undisciplined, ignorant mind is the chief cause of our entire samsara. Okay? So, he stresses that consciousness has the ability to realize objects, but that self-grasping ignorance obscures that ability. Yeah. And we can see it, in our lives, can't we? Okay. But the possibility to perceive all objects is there because the nature of the mind is clear and cognizant. You have a question?
I don't guess I have it clear yet about this word ignorance. Because there's afflicted ignorance.
Ignorance itself is afflictive.
Okay, so then when you're an arhat, you've gotten rid of that.
Yes.
So then if you got rid of that, how could you perceive all objects of knowledge?
Because the cognitive obscurations haven't been eliminated.
But they aren't based on ignorance.
They are. They're the latencies of ignorance. The latencies of ignorance have not yet been removed in an arhat.
Okay.
So that's why arhats don't have
time.
Omniscient minds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That terminology is where I get lost. The latencies of ignorance. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's like the difference between the onions and the smell of the onions. Okay. In Treatise on the Middle Way, Nagarjuna says that which is dependent arising is explained to be empty. Okay, that's come up in Geshe Dadal's teachings, and there's two verses, verse 18 and 19 in chapter 24, that he told us a couple of years ago we should memorize. But when objects appear to us, they do not appear to be dependent or related to other factors. Like I said, when we look at each other, we don't see, there's a person that has parents. Or there's a person who has, years of lifetime experience. Or there's a person who's the continuity of consciousness from many, many previous lifetimes. And that consciousness is carrying all sorts of karmic seeds. We don't see people in any way that resembles at all even how they conventionally exist. I mean, this is how out of touch with reality our minds are. But when objects and people appear to us, they do not appear to be dependent or related to other factors. They appear as independent, discrete objects that exist under their own power, with their own inherent essence from their own side. This appearance of objects as existing in their own right is false, And the idea that objects exist in that way is erroneous. So you have the appearance and then the conception or the idea that that appearance is correct. So the appearance is false, because, but the conception that thinks, that grasps that appearance is true, is erroneous and can be refuted by reasoning. Using investigation and analysis, we can establish the emptiness of inherent existence for ourselves. Inherent existence, also called existence from its own side, is called the object of negation. It is what is refuted or negated by analysis and reasoning. So the object of negation is something that has never existed. Yeah. So we're not destroying something that has existed when we refute inherent existence. We're realizing that something that has never existed has never existed. Okay. Once the analysis is complete, the consciousness realizing that persons and phenomena do not exist from their own side is generated in our mind stream. This wisdom consciousness damages and eventually overcomes completely the conception and grasping that objects exist inherently. So that term that can be translated as conception or grasping is Zin, and Zin can also be translated as apprehend. So you have to see what's going on in the context in which it's being used. So Jeffrey prefers to translate conception of inherent existence. I prefer to translate it as grasping inherent existence, because to me the word conceptions sound very gross, like you're actively thinking with words, this object exists inherently. But that grasping is innate, and it just comes. We're not sitting there consciously thinking it. Yeah, so that's why I prefer the translation of grasping rather than conception. In his commentary on the Compendium of Reliable Cognition, Dharmakirti says that mental states influenced by ignorance, like any other wrong conception or erroneous consciousness, lack a valid foundation. And mental states influenced by wisdom, ignorance, wisdom, like any other accurate consciousness, have a valid foundation. Thus, the more we become accustomed to correct consciousnesses, the more the faulty ones will diminish. Wisdom's mode of apprehension directly contradicts, like owls and crows. And what's a Western example? What? Day and night, yeah. Like day and night, it contradicts the view of ignorance, or the mode of apprehension of ignorance. So by familiarizing ourselves with wisdom, ignorance decreases and is finally extinguished. So if you're wondering how is it possible to eliminate ignorance forever from our mind streams, this is the explanation why. Okay? Because ignorance is an erroneous consciousness that misapprehends things. So when we generate the wisdom that apprehends things correctly, yeah, because truth is always victorious, this is the real meaning of truth is always victorious. This is the real meaning of it. Then it's possible to eliminate the wrong conception, the ignorance. Okay. Here we see a unique quality of the Buddhist approach. Erroneous mental states can be eradicated by cultivating their opposite, accurate states of mind. They are not removed simply through prayer, requesting blessings from the Buddha or deities, or gaining single-pointed concentration. So every teaching His Holiness gives, he says this. Yeah. Because ignorance has an antidote, it can be removed. This is the meaning of ignorance being adventitious. So adventitious means that it's temporary. It's not in the nature of things. Thus, it can be removed. Thus, because of the two factors mentioned earlier, the mind being the nature of clear light and defilements being adventitious, liberation is an attainable possibility. The Sublime Continuum that was written by Maitreya with commentary by Asanga says, this clear and luminous nature of mind is as changeless as space. It is not affected by desire and so on, the adventitious stains that spring from false conceptions. Okay, so whenever you feel down and you feel I'm hopeless, read this quotation. Yeah, so put it on your alarm clock, on your mirror. Each of the various Buddhist tenet systems has its own slightly different explanation of nirvana or liberation, but they all agree that it is a quality of the mind, the quality of the mind having separated forever from the defilements that cause cyclic existence through the application of antidotes to those defilements. Okay, so that's what nirvana is. Yeah, it's the quality of the mind that's separated from the defilements because the antidotes to the defilements have been applied. So not through magic, not through prayer, but through applying the antidotes. When we examine that separation from defilements, we discover it is the ultimate nature of the mind that is free from defilements. This ultimate nature of mind exists from beginningless time. It exists as long as there is mind. And in the continua or continuums of sentient beings, the ultimate nature of the mind is called Buddha nature or Buddha potential. When it becomes endowed with the quality of having separated from defilements, it is called nirvana. Therefore, the very basis for nirvana, the emptiness of the mind, is always with us. It is not something that is newly created or gained from outside. Okay, also very important to understand, that very basis of nirvana, nirvana being the ultimate nature of the mind that is free from all defilements through the application of antidotes. That empty nature of the mind is here right now. It's not something newly created. It's here right now. So the emptiness of our mind in terms of when it's directly perceived is the same as the emptiness of the Buddhist mind, because emptiness is emptiness. The difference is, one is the emptiness of a mind with defilements, the other is the emptiness of a mind free of all defilements. But in terms of emptiness, it's the emptiness when directly perceived is the same.
Is that called natural nirvana?
Yeah, that's what we call natural nirvana.
I'm really intrigued by that footnote about the clear light and how it can mean emptiness of inherent existence. And so I'm thinking about, how do the two meanings compare? Are they mutually exclusive? And if a term has different
yeah.
meanings, how do they
Right.
compare to each other?
Okay, well, one can refer to the clear and cognizant nature of the mind, and the other can refer to emptiness. So, what are the possibilities between the clear and cognizant nature of the mind and emptiness? Is there something that's both of them?
The emptiness of the mind?
Is there something that's both the clear and cognizant nature of the mind and emptiness? No, there's nothing that's both. Okay. Is there something that's the clear and cognizant nature of the mind but not emptiness? Yes. For example? Huh? Yeah, we're asking for an example of something that's the clear and cognizant nature of the mind that isn't emptiness. For example, how about the clear and cognitive nature of your mind? Yeah. Yeah. Is there something that's emptiness that is not the clear and cognizant nature of the mind? Yeah. What? Huh? Okay, so the emptiness of the table. Is there something that is neither the clear and cognizant nature of the mind nor emptiness? For example? The gong, the table. Okay. So are they mutually exclusive? Yeah.
Yes, because they're different. And one is not the other, and the other is not one.
Yeah. Okay. But when one exists, does the other one exist? Yeah. They're one nature. Because the clear and cognizant nature of the mind is the conventional nature of the mind. The emptiness of the mind is the ultimate nature of the mind. So those two, because remember the two truths are contradictory. They're contradictory and mutually exclusive, but they're one nature because one can't exist without the other. Huh? Yes, thank you.
We're looking at the stuff we learned from Jeffrey not so long ago.
Mm-hmm. But we're teaching this book now. Yes. Uh-huh. Although I wonder, I don't know if anyway, that's a different subject. Yeah?
I just want to say tonight's teaching just makes me feel very hopeful because, just even acknowledging whatever situation we're living in now, seeing every day and so forth, is the ripening result of past causes that we have created too, and owning that. Mm-hmm. And then feeling very hopeful that no matter what, we can create the causes for a different future.
Exactly.
So even if we may not see in this lifetime, just from the actions of our body, speech, and mind, if we dedicate those in that direction, we will see the ripening result.
Exactly.
And that makes me very hopeful.
Yes. Yes. And especially seeing the ripening result we have this lifetime and thinking of what we did in previous lifetimes to create the cause for our present opportunity.
Because, when at the recent Southeast Asian teachings, when His Holiness said, all our problems now are the ripening result of an education system overly focused on materialism. And I look at all the problems even right now, like a smelter being, the proposal for the smelter, the Kavanaugh hearing. It's a big part of it is the whole society or education being obsessed with materialism and reputation. Mm-hmm. And I feel sad when I see how my own life has been part of that too. Mm-hmm. And then also relieved that I'm not creating the causes to be Kavanaugh. I don't know. I would have, having had an elite education, blah, 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 I very well could have wound up in that
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah. Ruby Kavanaugh. Uh-huh.
I'm curious when you said that you had at the initial stages of learning Buddhism, you had the question like, how do I know the Buddha exists? How do I know this exists? But it was 30 to 40 years later, you said that you found this reasoning. So in that...
What did I do in those 30 and 40 years?
But I mean, how... That wasn't my... But how did you work with that question in terms of stabilizing your practice in that considerable period of time with not that clear answer?
What I did is the actual fact of the matter was that the Dharma made sense to me, and when I practiced it, it helped me. So whether or not I could logically prove the Buddha existed or not, I knew this medicine worked. So if medicine works, you keep taking it. Yeah.
It's interesting for me to reflect because my lazy mind goes, I don't have those questions arising so much. I just like, oh yeah, Buddha, Dharma, that makes sense. My mind, I just more readily accept and don't have the mind that's really wanting to question. So.
Yeah, well, that's okay. And then later, as you learn more, that questioning may start. Yeah, so that's okay. You can spend your life comparing yourself to other people. Now, you don't want to do that? Oh, but it's so much fun. Yeah? Am I better than them? Are they better than me? Who ranks first? Yeah. It's so much fun to ruminate about that, isn't it? I'm better than them. I'm worse than them. Yeah. I spend a lot of time on that.
Regarding dependent arising, I was also thinking regarding Governor, what's his name? Kavanagh. In case he has done this action, or even not, if he hasn't sexually assaulted this woman, if he has, then even more, the mind is so obscure, you can't hide it. The mind can't hide from that action. So the anger has to be there. I mean, if you had attachment that strong, there must be anger on top of it. So, and even if he doesn't have it, we are in cyclic existence, yeah. So, yeah, the affliction has to be there.
Yeah.
I just marvel again and again how His Holiness jumps right into emptiness. This is chapter 2 of the first book.
Yes.
And he just nosedives right into emptiness, dependent arising, and
the proof of the 3 jewels, in one chapter.
2.
No, the first chapter was an introductory chapter. Yeah, in one chapter. He just totally goes into, And this is his style. And he knows we won't understand everything completely, but he knows that by thinking about it and by planting these seeds, later these seeds will ripen and we'll come to understand these things. Yeah. And so that's why, even if you don't understand something, don't throw up your hands and say, oh, this is impossible. Yeah. Because this is the way the tradition teaches. It doesn't expect us to understand everything when we first hear it. We expect ourselves to understand everything. Yeah, but our teachers don't, and the tradition doesn't. Yeah, this is the way the educational system works. Yeah, you plant seeds and then seeds sprout. Remember? Not from self, not from other, not from both, and not causeless. But they sprout. Yeah. Yeah, we think it's like a biology class. Here are all the statements, I memorize them, and that means I've understood it. No.
Someone asked, referring to His Holiness just jumping right into emptiness, is he trying to puncture our pride in the West?
Sure, looks like it. I don't think that is his chief motivation, but I think that's a result that could happen. Yeah, but for some people it increases their pride. You know, you understand a little bit the words, then you think, oh, I understand everything.
I think it also shows he trusts our intelligence.
Yes, very definitely. He entrusts our intelligence.
And time is precious.
Hmm?
And time is precious.
Yes, so plant the seeds now. Even it's autumn, you plant the seeds now, because eventually it'll be spring and they'll have the other factors there and they'll sprout.